So, good morning, everybody. And even though I know the vast majority of people will not be listening nor watching to this on the morning, but anyhow, it's the morning. So, this last Saturday, I ran a half marathon. I can't really say I raced it because racing involves an attempt to win. Now, there's the truth that with running, you are always racing primarily against yourself. You're racing against your perception, your goals, your pain, and everything else like that. Racing is it's an endeavor that is incredibly self-critical, and it's incredibly exposing because you see your physical weaknesses as well as your mental weaknesses and your plans that you had laid out months in advance can be laid bare and stripped apart pretty quickly and easily. And so all that to say, the first half of the half marathon, so for the first 6.5 miles, I was on pace. And I was with a pace group, and it went pretty well. But there was something that was a pretty big red flag early on in the race. And so about a mile in, I had looked at my watch, which was either wise or unwise, and my heart rate was in the 170s, which is ridiculously high for that early in the race. The goal for the half marathon is, I guess, to have your heart progressively be working up, but in the first mile, the fitness level, my heart rate should have been from 145 to 150. That's incredibly nitpicky details for the two people who are going to listen to this that are going to care about that. So anyhow, for 6 miles, so for 45 minutes, I was averaging right at a 6:49 mile. And I had to pull back because I felt a feeling, had been feeling a feeling for over 20 minutes, that was a feeling that I experienced at 16 years old during a race in high school. Actually, was I 15 when that happened? It was around the time that I was, right around my 16th birthday, actually. So, during high school, the first meet of the year was against Three Rivers High School, which was about 20 minutes away, give or take, from Sturgis. And we alternated whose course we raced on. And my freshman year and junior year, we raced on their home course, which was a local tobogganing course. So a local park that people used for sledding, and it was an old, if my understanding, and I could be wrong, and I really hope someone corrects me, my understanding is that it was an old dump, so like hills and mounds had been built up and then grown over by whatever. So hence the hills that had developed. If not, an old dump is next to the current dump, so to say. But anyhow, there's lots of hills and valleys and no rivers to cross. But it was a hilly course, and it had been a course that this would have been my fourth time racing it, and it was the course that we had run the county championships on, which was a race that was near the end of the year, and I had been all county my freshman year, my sophomore year, and it was my junior year, and my brother had won at the end of my sophomore year. I was one of I think I was 8th or whatever, and my brother was first, and my older brother Daniel had also run incredibly well on that course. So like this was a course that the Murrays were known to have done well on. I lived out in the country where any of our summer running was on hills. And so like we were hill runners. Now I was not the best of the Murray hill runners, but it was a course that I had done well on. And during the course of that race, it was insane. I went out trying to run to win because like the expectation was that I would be battling for top position on that course. And I'm running against Nathan Martin, and I realized that my body wasn't responding right. And I started slowing down. And about a mile and a quarter, mile and a half way in, I actually have to stop and stretch my quads because like my legs were just that dead and unresponsive. And I want to say between 2.25 and 2.5 miles in, I actually collapsed during the race. And this was a feeling that was very odd. And I dealt with not being able to finish races that entire year because like my body would have this overall sensation of just being dead, and then just dealing also with the anxiety of that feeling, because if you've ever collapsed during an athletic performance, it's something you never want to repeat again. And it is very embarrassing to collapse during something. Just as men, we're taught to push, but then we're also told to be stronger and to be able to push through pain and overcome the wall. So when you've actually ran hard enough that you collapse, it's something pretty big. And I pushed through different barriers very hard. I can't tell you how many 800s, 4x8s, and 4x4s I have pushed myself so hard that I was thrown up after the race. So it's something that I had done. I pushed my way through difficulties quite a bit in running. So during the half marathon, that was a feeling that I experienced, and I had experienced that feeling also in April in the half marathon that I had ran. And I was frustrated because this shouldn't have been an issue of conditioning, though you could argue that I should have had more runs that were longer and all that other stuff. So I didn't have perfect training, but it was an issue where just like my head felt full and breathing didn't feel effective. Didn't feel bad, it just didn't feel effective. And my heart was telling me that it was doing more work than it should have. So anyhow, that's the story for the half marathon for the first half. The second half became then just, I was able to tell my wife at about mile 7 or 8, I was like, I'm just doing this for fun now. I'm just trying to finish. And it's hard when you put your body into a red line. Doing something relaxed afterwards is hard. And in running, it's easier to start off relaxed and then work past the red line instead of redlining first. So all that to say, like, it's just very interesting. But this made me think a lot about high school. High school is, it's a long time ago now for me. And I just thinking about who I am now and what I base my confidence and identity and personality in. As I'm becoming less of just, I'm less capable now of just going out and crushing running that I used to be. My body's not just the same. But anyhow, so I'm working through all these concepts of, will I ever be XYZ strong again, XYZ capable again. And in my coaching, one of the things that I tried to emphasize to my athletes was always, making sure that, one, they're racing against themselves, two, that they realize that they belong on the line, and just making sure that their identity wasn't wrapped around success. That they didn't feel like they had to win to be part of the team. I coached out of a lot of my weaknesses and insecurities, actually. I never wanted my athletes to feel like I was a coach out to get them. It's, to this day, one of the hardest things in my brain is wrapping my mind around a basketball coach who was coaching me, and instead of seeing the kind of motivation I needed, gave me the opposite. And instead of trying to give me confidence, he took confidence away from me, deriding me for my downfalls. And so it's just interesting to see the differences that people go. But in that, I think about how, so in high school, I was a young athlete. I graduated at 17. I got my driver's license March of my junior year. There was a large portion of my junior year, and even other times in my high school career before that, and then some in my senior year, just due to the family situation of, driving, that I rode with people to school. And we lived out in the country, and It's interesting too because tried out for basketball my junior year, and I approached those tryouts. My brain was on track. My brain wasn't on basketball. I loved basketball, but I didn't want to give up track success for basketball. I remember actually talking to the coach before that, who I'd known for a long time. He was my employer for years before that for detasseling. Knew my family, knew my older brothers, knew me, knew my work ethic from detasseling. I remember asking him, like, will I still be able to train, like, go for runs or whatever? Like, how will I still train for track while doing basketball? So I ended up getting cut from basketball. I was one of the people that didn't make the varsity team as a junior, and one of my main rides to school was a classmate named Dustin Cox. And it was one of the most embarrassing things for me to have him pick me up before school and drive me to school after a varsity basketball game where he had been playing, and we picked up someone else who was on the basketball team multiple days. And so I was riding in the car with two guys who made the basketball team when I didn't. And I was so self-conscious and so worried that they thought that I was a loser. And the irony is, I look back on it, and my ego is too big to be thankful for the ride that I was being given. So, like, I just want to publicly on the internet give a huge shout out and thank you to Dustin Cox for giving me rides to and from school. Like, I remember riding, so he had a Jeep for one point in time where we'd listen to Kanye West, and it's actually listening to those same songs now later on, if they're ever on the radio or background to some reel or whatever. Like, it's a great memory. And then he also had a specific car that every time I see him, I'm like, Dustin drove one of those. And I remember the center console being all dials for stuff, for heat and for volume. And it still is one of the coolest. Like, I think dials are awesome rather than buttons for pushing for hotter or warmer. So, like, just a huge shout out and thanks to him. Taylor Polzin, who was a grade behind me, he was another guy who lived close to me, gave me rides to and from school, to and from practice. Just huge shout out to him. Austin Brown, so Taylor, grade behind, we did cross country and track together. Austin, cross country and track together, same grade. He did not. We played basketball freshman sophomore year together. He swam instead of doing basketball his junior year. He wasn't cut. He just chose to do something different. Incredible athlete. Just shout out to him. Thank you for giving me rides. Then Derek Gentili, who was a baseball, football, basketball guy. Huge shout out to him. He was a grade behind me. And Kyle Mills gave me countless rides to and from Youth for Christ, and to and from cross country camp, to and from detasseling over the summer. And I say all this because, one of the things that also frustrated me so much as a coach the last few years was whenever I saw people refusing to accept rides from other people, and how financially that put them into different positions, and how it is humiliating if you let it be humiliating. But, like, it was never humiliating for Kyle to give me a ride, because Kyle was a friend and a coworker in detasseling, and with Youth for Christ, a huge part of both of our lives. And in fact, his dad was the track coach and assistant cross country coach, and a former and then at that point future employer of mine whenever I worked for Youth for Christ. And so, like, looking at all these things, it's so silly how we can wrap ourselves and our identity around things that might only matter to us. And if we're too trapped in our ego, we play a deadly comparison game to someone else's success rather than being able to celebrate them. And so, like, this is the warning to anyone who watches this who's in high school or junior high. Like, don't allow yourself to play the comparison game where you're jealous of someone else's success rather than celebrating their success. In Romans 12, Paul says that you need to rejoice with those who rejoice. And like, if there are athletes in your school or people who do well academically, like, rejoice in their capacities and their capabilities. Like, this is someone who is blessed, and you should be happy for them. The stage of life that you're in, you're always going to have challenges where you're asking yourself questions. And the more you allow yourself to be immersed in untruth early, the more you have to then unteach yourself as an adult. As we're preaching through Ephesians, there's this conversation where Paul says in Ephesians and Philippians and Colossians, where he says, that, however, is not the way of life you have learned when you heard about Christ and were taught in him in accordance with the truth that is in Jesus. You were taught with regard to your former way of life to put off your old self, which is being corrupted by its deceitful desires, to be made new in the attitude of your minds, and to put on the new self, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness. And just thinking about how my sin corrupts truth. And so on a team, you need to be able to celebrate your teammates' success, and that their success can be something that helps push you from a positive way. That there shouldn't be this stupid rivalry that goes on. This is one of those silly things I think back on. I was never the best 800-meter runner on my team. My freshman and sophomore year, so I was behind Patrick Hall my freshman year, and we were like just duking it out really close to each other. And then my sophomore year, I was doing really well, and then it became something where it's like, but I was never number one. Junior year, I was set up to be number one on that team in the 800, and then Austin moved from being a 2-miler and miler down to a mile 800 runner, and then he was the best. And then senior year, Austin went to state. He went on to run at Grand Valley State University. Major shout out to him on that. But just like, oh my goodness, like, it frustrated me so much that I wasn't the number one 800 runner on the team. And like, how silly is that? Like, you should want to be the best that you can be, and it shouldn't matter how someone else is doing. So I would have been the number one runner on so many other teams in the state with my times. But I was just on an incredibly deep and talented team where other teams didn't even have one athlete who was fast enough to qualify on time for the regional competition. At the regional meet, you were allowed to enter 2 athletes or a third if they were under a specific time. And we had 3 athletes who could do that. And other schools didn't even have any. So, like, instead of celebrating that there's other people of equal talent, I compared myself. I had a rivalry. I think Paul talks a little bit about rivalries in Scripture. So all that to say, today's ramblings was about my thoughts and my processing about the half marathon and how I had to genuinely humble myself and figure out how I can accept the truth that I wasn't able to do something that I wanted to do, and to be able to reconcile that my value and worth wasn't in how well I did. And I did a whole lot better this time than the last time whenever I failed. But super big shout out to my wife and my daughters who, got up early and cheered me on during the race. Super big shout out to all the F3 guys who ran that half marathon, whether they beat me or were behind me. Huge shout out. Like, that was a big accomplishment. I mean, 13.1 miles is a lot. It was the Churchill's half marathon here, and it started in Perrysburg and ended in Waterville. And I knew there was going to be a big hill in the second half of the race, and there were 3 hills, and it was a lot harder second half of the race. The one hill, it's going up and around a turn, and so it's an uphill where if you've never ran it before, you don't know how much longer it's going to go. And so it just kept going and going and going, and then it kind of leveled out, and then we ran over an overpass. So I'm like, there's another little hill. But it was fun. It was fine. And huge shout out to David Kaiser, the other pastor on staff here, who he's run some marathons. He came out and it was a huge encouragement to me and everything there. And he took a picture of the half marathon, which should be the icon for this video if I am alert for that. But just huge shout out to Melissa Green, my mother-in-law, for texting me before the race. Chad Earhart texting me before the race. My parents checking in afterwards. Just people caring about how that went. And so in life, we are always ever faced with the question of what does it mean to mature? What does it mean to grow? What does it mean to have a true self-worth and value? And the older I get, the more I think back on, there were people in high school that I had jealousy of or rivalry with, that just looking back more and more, they were good people who are good people now, who I'm just so happy to see them succeeding. And no one, I think, would have really thought of me as a jealous, rivalrous person in high school. And so these are maybe things that, the world and people around you might not see these qualities in your heart. But if the Lord shows you that you have a negative quality that you got to call it out, root it out, call it what it is, put it before the altar and say, Lord, this is something that is not of you. This is not what is a life of holiness and righteousness, and put it down on the altar. I believe life genuinely goes better when we walk humbly and joyfully, celebrating others, and just relishing the good in the world that can be there. And then whenever there is something that is wrong, we deal with it, and we deal with things out of the generosity of our heart. And that's all I got today. It was probably a super long rambling, and thank you, Mom, for always listening to these. You're the true MVP.